Chapter 1341. As the principal of Monster Academy, NC had been furious, and he took Tongu back to the academy in person to execute him. Tongu offered no resistance throughout the entire process, and after ascertaining the sequence of events that had led up to his heinous crime, NC was very hesitant about how to proceed. It was extremely difficult to produce a hyper-Douluo, particularly one like Tongu, who was willing to remain in the academy, but this matter couldn't just be settled without any consequences being handed down. Thus, after extensive discussions with the officials of the Empire, they decided to give Tongu some leniency. All powerful beings at the titled Douluo level or above had certain amnesty rights, but Tongu's crime was far too heinous to simply go unpunished. As such, he was given a sentence of 50 years imprisonment, and he was prohibited from owning a suit of battle armor for the rest of his life. At the same time, he would have to remain in Monster Academy for as long as he lived, unless the academy gave him express permission to go elsewhere. In the end, NC had saved his life, but also taken away his freedom, and in a sense, Tongu had become the guardian of Monster Academy. It had been 37 years since that incident, and Tongu was close to 70 years of age. NC was the only one that he took orders from, and he was technically a secret guardian of Monster Academy. There were very few people even among the academy's students who were aware of his existence. The Tongu incident was an important factor behind why NC was so strict to Long Yue, especially when it came to emotional control. The general public had been extremely displeased by this outcome, and signed a petition to have Tongu executed. In the end, he was only able to survive as the officials in Monster Academy had stood up against the social pressures until the incident was gradually forgotten. As such, all of the spectators had erupted into a frenzy upon hearing the words Kilin Douluo Tongu. Piss off, you murderer. Why is a murderer representing our empire? Who gave him that right? Execute him. A series of enraged voices rang out, and the atmosphere of excitement in the stadium instantly turned into one of fury. Tang Wolin was rather taken aback by this response as he waited near the other entrance. He didn't know who this Kilin Douluo Tongu was, but what he did know was that he definitely wasn't on the list of the potential opponents that the smiling Douluo had outlined for this match. However, from the reaction of the spectators, Tang Wolin could tell that this Kilin Douluo was quite renowned. No, to put it more accurately, he seemed to be extremely notorious. How could the Douluo Empire have chosen someone like him to participate in the trial of 5 gods? On the rostrum, Dai Tianling's brows furrowed tightly as he turned to NC with displeasure in his eyes. This was the trial of 5 gods. How could a criminal represent the empire during such a sacred event? Dai Tianling was suddenly struck by the feeling that he was too trusting of this teacher of his. Choosing Dang Yang the day before had already been a very controversial decision, yet he had managed to even outdo that today. Even if Tongu were to win this match, there would still be no glory for the empire. How pitiful was it that their empire had to turn to a criminal to defend its honor? NC stood up from his seat before half kneeling in front of Dai Tianling as he said in an earnest manner, Your Majesty, Tongu has always been waiting for an opportunity, and this is extremely important for him. I can guarantee you that he won't bring shame to our empire. He's waited 37 years for this day, so please grant him this opportunity, Your Majesty. After this match, I'm willing to accept any punishment you wish to pass down onto me. Dai Tianling didn't know why NC had made this decision, but NC's earnest display showed him that there had to be a legitimate reason for this. As such, his expression eased slightly as he hurriedly helped NC to his feet. Please don't be like this, teacher. I have trust in you. Thank you, Your Majesty. NC turned and cast his gaze toward Tongu with an encouraging expression. Go and do what you want to do, Tongu. Even in the face of all of the abuse being hurled at him by the spectators, Tongu remained very calm. He had already faced the exact same thing several decades ago, and this was an extremely important day for him. So nothing in the outside world mattered in his eyes. All of the abuse and resentment being directed toward him was inconsequential, and he looked straight ahead as he strode directly toward the competition platform. The protective barrier rose up to cut off all sound from the outside world, and a cold look appeared in Tongu's eyes. Tang Wolin also strode onto the competition platform. He was unable to sense his opponent's exact cultivation rank, but he knew that this definitely wasn't going to be an easy opponent. The announcer was afraid to rile up the spectators any further than they already were, so he immediately announced the commencement of the match without wasting any time. Tongu didn't immediately attack. Instead, he threw his head back and roared to the heavens. The sound from the outside world couldn't be heard from within the protective barrier, but the sounds that rang out within the barrier were audible to everyone outside. Tongu's roar sounded like a pride of lions roaring in unison, and his voice managed to drown out the collective voices of the 100,000 spectators present. A series of soul rings then began to emerge beneath his feet, and Tang Wolin was stunned to discover that all of Tongu's soul rings were red. There were 9 of them in total, and as they emerged, Tongu's aura began to swell at an insane rate. Never had Tang Wolin ever seen or heard of someone who possessed 9 100,000-year-old soul rings. This indicated that he possessed at least 18 soul skills, and all of them were definitely going to be extremely fearsome. Tang Wolin could also hear an undertone of frustration and fury in Tongu's roar, as if he were trying to release all of his pent-up emotions through his voice. Everyone's expressions changed drastically at the sight of the 9 red soul rings that had emerged from beneath his feet, and the spectator stands were stunned into silence. Inside the Spirit Pagoda booth, Zhang Yang was also astonished by this incredible spectacle, but he then quickly burst into laughter. Fantastic. I didn't think that Monster Academy would have someone like this up their sleeve. NC really is pulling out all the stops for this trial of 5 gods. Yu Yuna merely looked on in silence. Zhang Yang was laughing, but there was clearly a hint of envy in his eyes at the sight of Tongu's 9 red soul rings. This was undoubtedly the ultimate pursuit of a soul master, and not even any of the limit Douluo in history had ever achieved such an incredible soul ring configuration. Did this mean that Tongu was already a limit Douluo? He had already been a hyper Douluo 37 years before, and he had somehow managed to evolve all of his soul rings to the 100,000-year level. So what about his cultivation rank? 37 years was definitely enough for an outrageous talent like him to make that all-important breakthrough. Could it be that he was the Douluo Empire's second limit Douluo? The same thoughts were running through the minds of almost everyone present. He was indeed a murderer, but he had already been imprisoned for 37 years. If he had become a limit Douluo and could control his own power, then could he be forgiven? The opinions of some of the spectators were already beginning to sway. After all, this was a limit Douluo in a world where power was revered above all else. A being of his caliber could perhaps play a pivotal role in deciding the fate of the entire empire if a war were to break out. There wasn't even a single limit Douluo in the Dou Empire, and even in the Douluo Federation, there were only several limit Douluos in total. If the Douluo Empire could add another limit Douluo to their ranks, then the overall power of the entire empire would definitely be significantly enhanced. Chapter 1342. However, could he really be forgiven for the heinous crime that he had committed? A grim expression had appeared on Tang Wolin's face, and he had also released his own martial soul. A series of soul rings emerged from beneath his feet, and his greenish golden and orange golden soul rings were still as eye-catching as ever. But in the face of the 9 red soul rings, they were rendered rather insipid. Tang Wolin knew that Tongu was most likely going to be the most powerful opponent that he had ever faced, and he even suspected that his powers may have already surpassed those of NC. The thunderous roar continued to echo throughout the entire stadium, but Tongu had already lowered his head again and focused his gaze on Tang Wolin. The scales on his face and his red and blue eyes were very unsettling to behold, and without uttering a single word, Tongu suddenly sprang into action. The scales on his body abruptly expanded, and his stature also swelled to over 3 meters tall. He charged directly toward Tang Wolin with unstoppable might, and those 9 dazzling red soul rings revolved around him. Tang Wolin could clearly see that there was 5-colored light emanating from his body. The light was quite bright and piercing to behold, and what was quite strange was that the surrounding air had begun to twist and warp. There seemed to be 5 types of elements surging toward the 5-colored light around Tongu, but even Tang Wolin was unable to identify what those 5 types of elements were. Was this a domain? A spiritual domain? Was he a limit Douluo? These were the first thoughts that occurred to Tang Wolin. He knew that he would be facing an extremely powerful opponent during this battle, but he didn't think that he would be facing a limit Douluo. At his current cultivation rank, he had no chance at all against a limit Douluo. Tang Wolin took a deep breath to compose himself. He knew that he wouldn't be able to hold back at all today, and that this was going to be a battle of survival for him. Instead of retreating, he took a step forward before stumping a foot heavily down onto the ground. Golden scales instantly surfaced all over his body, and he also rapidly grew to over 3 meters tall. This was his golden dragon body. A thunderous dragon's roar rang out, and his 8 soul rings instantly switched to his 6 golden soul rings, following which the first, third, and fourth soul rings lit up in unison. These soul rings corresponded with his golden dragon body, golden dragon roar, and violent golden dragon domain, respectively. In the face of the golden dragon roar, Tongu only faltered momentarily before continuing to rush toward Tang Wolin, seemingly having been affected by the attack to a very minimal degree. Tang Wolin felt as if everything around him had suddenly congealed, making it impossible for him to even evade his opponent's attack. As such, he could only raise his own fist and lash out in retaliation. Boom! The two fists collided, and Tongu wasn't as powerful as Tang Wuling had imagined that he would be. However, there was a very special type of energy intermingled with his power. It was like a vortex that was drawing in Tang Wuling's power. Only following this initial contact did Tang Wuling suddenly realize Tongu's power wasn't a traditional elemental power. Instead, it was a 5 elemental power. Among those 5 elements, water, fire, and earth were quite common, but metal and wood were extremely rare. The 5 elements gave rise to and enhanced one another to produce a different type of power. This indicated that Tongu's martial soul was most likely the 5 elemental Qilin. A resounding boom rang out, and Tang Wuling was forced to stumble back 3 steps, while Tongu was nearly stopped cold in his tracks. It seemed that Tang Wuling had fallen to a disadvantage, but he was actually very relieved following the clash as he had verified that Tongu was not a limit Douluo. His powers were at the hyper Douluo level at most, and they were only comparable to those of a rookie hyper Douluo who had only just made it to rank 95 in soul power. In that case, there was still a chance for him. After gaining the upper hand during that first clash, Tongu continued to press his advantage. He swept his left hand through the air to send a burst of 5 colored light hurtling directly toward Tang Wuling, and within the 5 colored light, Tang Wuling could feel that his soul power was seeping away at a rapid rate, as if it were being absorbed by his opponent. At the same time, Tongu's fist arrived again, and Tang Wuling adopted the same countermeasures, clenching his right golden dragon claw into a fist as well to oppose his opponent's attack. A resounding dragon's roar rang out across the entire venue, and a giant dragon emerged from Tang Wuling's back, then flowed all the way along his right arm before reaching his fist. This was his golden dragon shocks the heavens. Boom. Once again, Tang Wuling was forced back 3 steps, while Tongu's first soul ring lit up, and a giant Qilin projection emerged behind him. His right arm abruptly expanded, and scales emerged from beneath his skin as a string of dull cracks and pops rang out from his joints. This was his Qilin arm. Tang Wuling's cultivation rank was far inferior to that of his opponent, but he had supreme confidence in his own strength. He switched over to his original 8 soul rings again, and his third soul ring lit up as a halo proliferated outward from beneath his feet. At the same time, his right arm also expanded, and he unleashed his golden dragon annihilation claws. Giant claw projections emerged without any premonition, and they clashed with Tongu's Qilin arm, which was radiating bright 5-colored light that had taken on the form of a Qilin. Golden dragon annihilation claws combined the power of the golden dragon king and the dusk gold dreadclaw bear, the latter of which had virtually the sharpest claws in the entire world of soul beasts. As such, even the 5-colored light conjured up by the 5 elemental Qilin was torn apart, and explosive power erupted in all directions as the claw's projections continued on toward Tongu. Tongu's third soul ring lit up, and he raised his left arm as a giant shield that was completely formed by scales appeared in front of him. Boom. Tongu was forced back a couple of steps by the force of the impact, but the light radiating from the red soul rings around him only brightened even further. He supported the shield with both arms, then instantly broke the sound barrier as he crashed directly toward Tang Wuling amid a resounding sonic boom. Tang Wuling stomped his right foot into the ground, and blue silver emperor vines erupted from his body to combine with his golden dragon king power. This was his blue emperor dragon shocks the heavens. Another resounding boom rang out, and Tang Wuling was forced back while Tongu was stopped in his tracks again. Right at this moment, Tongu felt a burst of powerful suction force erupt from the ground down below, and it severely weakened his 5 elemental domain. This was the blue silver golden ray that Tang Wuling hadn't used for a very long time, and its main ability was elemental stripping. Tongu's 5 elemental domain allowed him to absorb the opponent's power for himself, so he was benefiting himself at the expense of his opponent. In contrast, Tang Wuling's blue silver golden array weakened his opponent for no benefit to himself, and he was using it precisely to weaken Tongu. Tongu harumphed coldly as he let loose a loud roar, then made a grabbing motion toward Tang Wuling. His second soul ring lit up, and a massive 5-colored hand appeared around Tang Wuling before grabbing onto him. This was his 5 elemental grip. He then used the second soul skill again, and another huge hand appeared, but this one balled up into a fist before striking Tang Wuling's body. This was his 5 elemental ram. The most fearsome part about Tongu's attacks was that every single one of them was imbued with 5 elemental power, and this unique power was very difficult for the opponent to nullify. If someone with a lesser physical constitution were in Tang Wuling's shoes, their body would have most likely already broken down. Tang Wuling only had a chance to unleash his golden dragon tyrant body before he was struck by the 5 elemental ram, and the scales on his body flashed erratically as he gave a muffled groan. Due to the restriction of the 5 elemental grip, he wasn't sent flying, but this was a very heavy blow. In particular, the injection of 5 elemental power into his body was steadily chipping away at his powers. What could he do? There were no options open to Tang Wuling. He had been entirely suppressed by his opponent, and the vast disparity between their cultivation ranks made it very difficult for him to resist. Chapter 1343. Tang Wuling's 6th soul ring lit up, and he was forced to be the first one to use a soul skill of a higher caliber. A massive purple flower projection appeared behind him. The blue silver golden array had already crumbled after Tang Wuling was struck by that 5 elemental ram. But when this giant flower appeared, the 5 elemental power around Tongu and the 5 elemental group that was binding Tang Wuling suddenly transformed into specks of light that surged toward Tang Wuling's body. 5 elemental power belonged to nature as well, so it was also prone to the effect of devouring heaven and earth. With the assistance of devouring heaven and earth, Tang Wuling's aura swelled drastically, and his body shuddered slightly as he unleashed his golden dragon vibrational explosion to struggle free from the 5 elemental grip. He spread his wings before flapping them vigorously, and actively unleashed an attack for the first time during this battle. It was his blue emperor golden dragon takes flight. His blood soul fusion skills were one of his greatest trump cards, and the speed of this attack was simply extraordinary. He reached out with his golden dragon claws, and his body seemed to have transformed into a streak of light that virtually instantaneously reached his opponent. Tongu's emotional fluctuations seemed to have subsided at this point, and 2 beams of dazzling light suddenly erupted from his blue and red eyes before intertwining as they hurtled directly toward Tang Wuling. What would happen when 2 completely contrasting powers, fire and ice, combined as one? This was a situation that Tang Wuling hadn't encountered even in the ice fire yin yang well, but it was unfolding right before his eyes now. A resounding explosion rang out, and his blue emperor golden dragon takes flight was stopped cold in its tracks. Tongu had already leapt into the air above him, and his first soul ring lit up. It was still his Qilin arm soul skill, but on this occasion, the arm was burning with 5 colored flames. These were 5 elemental flames. Each 100,000-year-old soul ring could grant 2 soul skills, and Tongu was displaying this to Tang Wuling now. What was even more fearsome was that all of his soul skills were of the 100,000-year level. Boom. Tang Wuling was smashed straight into the ground, where he left a massive crater on the competition platform. Even though the 5 elemental power he had been struck by had been significantly nullified by his devouring heaven and earth, he had still been dealt an extremely heavy blow, and in the eyes of the spectators, the battle was already decided. However, Tongu wasn't of the same opinion. When his attack had struck Tang Wuling, he could clearly feel that Tang Wuling's body had become extremely flexible and supple, but also fearlessly solid and tough at its core. The supple part had nullified part of his power, while the tough part had resulted in backlash force that had stopped him cold in his tracks, thereby preventing him from being able to swoop in and press his advantage. After being slammed into the ground, Tang Wuling didn't immediately get up. Instead, his body began to undergo a transformation. A series of giant blue-silver emperor vines emerged from the crater, and they were like bluish golden giant dragons that swept toward Tongu. This was a combination of his blue-silver overlord transformation and blue-silver true body. Those dragon-like vines intertwined in the air, and Jiang reflexively rose to his feet upon seeing this, thinking that this was his infernal lightning vine. If Tang Wuling had already fused with the infernal lightning vine, then he wouldn't be able to recover his soul spirit even if he were to kill Tang Wuling. Upon catching a clear glimpse of the appearance of these vines, he immediately heaved a sigh of relief, but at the same time, his brows were tightly furrowed. Each and every vine was covered in bluish golden scales, and they didn't even look like plants anymore. In particular, their tips had taken on the form of rough dragons' heads, and they were extremely dazzling to behold. The vines enveloped Tongu in the blink of an eye before attempting to bind onto him, and 5 elemental flames erupted from Tongu's body in retaliation to try and burn these vines. However, the scales on the surface of these vines were extremely tough, and even though they were somewhat affected by the flames, they still continued to converge around Tongu's body. Right at this moment, Tongu's 5th soul ring lit up, and 5 balls of light that were golden, azure, blue, red, red, and yellow in color emerged around him before exploding in unison. This was his 5 elemental divine lightning. A violent explosion rang out, and the 5 elemental powers instantly fused as one to form a 5 elemental storm that forced back the converging blue silver emperor vines. At the same time, Tongu clasped his hands together before raising them high over his head, and a vibrant 5-colored blade emerged in his grasp before crashing down directly toward the core of the blue silver emperor vines. This was his 6th soul skill, Great 5 Elemental Divine Saber. The air twisted and warped in the wake of the Great 5 Elemental Divine Saber, which was imbued with a peerlessly destructive aura. At the center of the blue silver emperor vines, Tongu re-emerged with a solemn expression. He seemed to have entered a very special state, and he clenched his right fist before slowly extending it as he took a step forward. Golden flames instantly rose up from his body, and his aura began to climb at an alarming rate. His outward appearance didn't really change, but in that instant, even Tongu, who possessed the bloodline of the Qilin, felt as if he were facing an almighty being whom he couldn't oppose. A golden path of light began to extend toward Tongu with Tongu as its origin, and within that golden path, Tongu's fist was rapidly expanding. This was his path of regal domination. Boom! A violent explosion of energy ensued, and Tongu was blasted up into the air. Countless wounds appeared over Tongu's body, and there were many sections of his dragon scales that had been torn open, but he still stood on the spot in a resolute manner. This was the might of the path of regal domination. Unless Tongu were to be killed, there was no way that his opponent could force him to take a backward step. In the next instant, countless blue silver emperor vines rose up before instantly converging to form a spear. This was his blue emperor fury of the masses, and it was being thrust directly toward Tongu, who had just been flung up into the air. The entire spectator stands were completely silent at this point. Everyone had the entirety of their attention focused on this battle. As soon as the match had begun, Tongu and Tongu had exchanged a series of devastating attacks, and both sides had directly fought fire with fire. Initially, it appeared that Tongu had been forced onto the back foot, but he had quickly managed to claw his way back into the match. This undoubtedly indicated that his powers were already comparable to those of a hyper Douluo. Furthermore, the battle between them was extremely spectacular with lights and flames of all types of different colors hurtling through the air. Tongu was like a vibrant and colorful monster, whereas Tongu was the glamorous golden dragon warrior. In the eyes of many of the female spectators present, Tongu was like a hero who was battling a demon, and they were completely entranced. In contrast, the people on the rostrum and the other powerful soul masters in the spectator stands were rather confused. The smiling Douluo was one of those people. This killing Douluo Tongu didn't seem to be as powerful as he had imagined. He had been very alarmed when he had heard that Tongu's opponent would be Tongu, as he was aware of Tongu's past criminal record. There were definitely some flaws in his personality, which would lead to him going overboard in this battle. The other reason for his concern was that all of the most powerful soul masters in the Douluo Empire knew that this killing Douluo was the likeliest candidate to become a limit Douluo. The main reason that Monster Academy had chosen to protect him following the crime that he had committed was his cultivation aptitude. So in the face of a powerful being of his caliber, Tongu should have had no chance at all. However, the battle wasn't progressing as the smiling Douluo had expected. Tongu's attacks were very fierce, but they seemed to be lacking in power. At the very least, the attacks definitely weren't at the limit Douluo level, and it was debatable whether he was even displaying hyper Douluo level power. Of course, his 5 elemental killing martial soul was extremely powerful, but he was still unable to completely dominate Tongu, and that came as quite a relief to Hujie, but also left him feeling quite perplexed. Could it be that not only had Tongu not improved during the past 37 years, he had regressed instead? Hujie wasn't the only one perplexed by this. NC was also appraising the match with befuddlement in his eyes, so it was quite clear that Tongu should have been more powerful than his current display suggested. So what exactly was hampering his performance? Could it be that he was waiting for Tongu to grow complacent before dealing a decisive blow to defeat him, or even worse, to kill him? Chapter 1344. With that in mind, a hint of fear welled up in the smiling Douluo's heart. However, this was the trial of 5 gods, so even he couldn't intervene to stop the battle. He could only pray that Tongu doesn't fall prey to Tongu's tricks. Boom. The blue emperor fury of the masses clashed with Tongu's fists, and he was sent flying even higher up into the air. A series of blue silver emperor vines then immediately erupted forth to form a giant net that swept toward him. At the same time, a resounding dragon's roar rang out from the center of the blue silver emperor vines, and a giant golden dragon emerged. In contrast with Goldsong, this golden dragon had a pair of wings and was over 30 meters in length. As soon as it appeared, the entire sports stadium was instantly bathed in a golden radiance. It was as if countless giant dragons were roaring in unison, and the peerlessly powerful blood essence fluctuations radiating from Tongu's body struck all of the dragon-type soul masters present with an intense sense of pressure. To put it more accurately, all soul masters with beast martial souls were struck by the urge to bow down in subordination as if they had met their ruler, and there was no room for any emotions in their hearts other than fear and reverence. Fox King Sumu sat bolt upright on the rostrum upon seeing this. Back when he had faced Tongu during the youth tournament, he had initially gained the upper hand, only to be defeated due to the blood oppression that Tongu was able to exert upon him. After so many years had passed, Tongu's bloodline aura had become countless times more powerful, and his 9-tailed fox bloodline was trembling in his veins. The protective barrier should have been able to filter out all types of energy fluctuations, including bloodline auras. So could it be that the reaction he was displaying was in response to just the sound alone? Was Tongu truly already this powerful? As one of the 8 monster kings, he and all of the other kings had a virtually blind and unconditional confidence in Long Yue. But for the first time, Sumu was beginning to wonder whether Long Yue would still be a match for Tongu. Tongu was truly far too powerful. He had secured 2 consecutive victories in the Trail of 5 Gods, and both of his opponents had been at or above the title Douluo level. Sumu really didn't want to admit it, but he was feeling completely inferior and defeated in the face of Tongu. How was he supposed to overcome an opponent like this? They weren't even on the same level anymore. The thunderous dragon's roar had stunned the entire stadium, but all of the high-grade soul masters present were more astonished by the form that Tongu was currently displaying. Those massive powerful vines were undoubtedly an extension of his martial soul true body. But what was that giant golden dragon? It definitely wasn't a soul spirit, as it was different from all of the soul spirits he had revealed the day before. Could it be that this was another martial soul true body? But even soul masters with twin martial souls couldn't release both of their martial soul true bodies at once. This was simply unheard of. How had Tongu managed to accomplish this? Indeed, there was no way for someone with twin martial souls to accomplish, but Tongu never had twin martial souls to begin with. Even he hadn't been aware that he was able to do this until he unintentionally discovered one day that his blue silver emperor and bloodline power could be separated after he unleashed his martial soul true body. In a sense, this was like using 2 martial soul true bodies at once, but his blue silver emperor could operate on his battle instincts alone. So his golden dragon king bloodline occupied the primary position. His blue silver emperor martial soul was adept in control, while his golden dragon king bloodline was perfect for offense, and the combination of the two was an ideal match that drastically enhanced his combat prowess. Tongu had just been sent flying and was still reeling from the effect of the blue emperor fury of the masses when he was met by a charge from the golden dragon king true body, which was hurtling toward him at over the speed of sound. This was a combination of Tongu's golden dragon roar, golden dragon shocks the heavens, and golden dragon vibrational explosion. In that instant, Tongu had been completely forced onto the back foot, and he was also extremely stunned, not by Tongu's twin martial soul true bodies, but by his bloodline instead. Ever since his recessive killing bloodline had been awakened, his bloodline had never been suppressed by anyone else. However, in the instant that Tongu revealed his golden dragon king true body, Tongu instantly felt that his bloodline fluctuations had been quelled. For the first time ever, Tongu could sense a hint of fear originating from his 5 elemental killing bloodline, and that was undoubtedly going to severely affect his powers. On top of that, Tongu's ferocious attack had already arrived. Having been driven into a corner, Tongu took a deep breath, and a layer of 5-colored light emerged from his body. The 5-color light had conjured up 5 giant runes of different colors beneath his feet, each of which corresponded with one of the 5 elemental powers that he controlled. As soon as these runes emerged, it was as if 5 giant vortexes had appeared in the air above. 5 elemental revolution, Qilin transformation. Tongu swiveled around in midair and abruptly transformed into a 5-colored Qilin that was over 10 meters in length. In contrast with his ghastly human form, his 5 elemental Qilin form was a lot more majestic and spectacular. He opened his mouth to expel a burst of 5-colored flames, which surged directly toward Tongu, and Tongu was instantly struck by a rush of dizziness. The 5 elemental true flames clashed with his golden dragon shocks the heavens, and he felt as if his energy and soul power were being cleansed away. He then caught sight of a flash of light from the tip of the horn on the 5 elemental Qilin's head, and in the instant that this light emerged, Tongu's 8th soul ring also lit up. This was not good. An overwhelming sense of peril washed over Tongu, and he could sense that his life was under threat. The five-colored light reached his glabella almost instantaneously, and his body began to tremble slightly from intense fear. His subconsciousness told him that this was not an attack that he could withstand, and that if he were to be struck by it, then the only possible outcome that awaited him was death. This was the power of a domain, and it was most likely a spiritual domain. With this five-elemental revolution domain, Tongu had managed to instantly enhance his own five elemental powers and nullify the effect that Tongu's golden dragon king bloodline had on him. The five elemental true flames didn't seem to be a direct attack, but it was more powerful than any attack. In the face of the five elemental true flames, at least 70% of the power of Tongu's attack had been nullified, and the streak of five-colored light that followed was the truly lethal blow. On the rostrum, Hujier had already risen to his feet with a horrified look in his eyes. This was what he had been most concerned about. NC and Daitianling's expressions also changed drastically. They didn't want to see the Tang sect master perish during the trial of five gods. Either, if that were to happen, their entire empire would have to bear the wrath of the Tang sect, and in the face of the impending war, that would put them in an extremely perilous situation. In contrast, Zhang Yang's face had lit up with elation, but what he had failed to notice was that Yuna's body had suddenly become rather illusionary in appearance. Time seemed to have completely frozen in that instant. The reversal had taken place far too quickly. Tang Wulian had held a decisive upper hand just a moment ago, yet now, he was being faced with a lethal threat. Who could possibly envision such a drastic turn of events? Tang Wulian knew that there was no way that he would be able to evade this attack, nor did he possess the power to withstand it. It was undoubtedly going to be a lethal strike, but in the face of this lethal threat, his body reacted on its own. Powerful energy fluctuations erupted forth, and the space around Tang Wulian's body suddenly began to twist and warp. All of the spectators and the people on the rostrum were then struck by a sense of disorientation that caught everyone completely off guard. Chapter 1345. In that instant, the world in the eyes of the spectators had become warped. This warping effect only lasted for an instant, but during that split second, they couldn't hear any sound, and all they could see were warped rays of light. It was as if they were in a dream. They were then greeted by the sight of the giant golden dragon twisting around in a brilliant maneuver to evade the five-colored flames descending from above, then appeared beside the five-elemental Qilin true body before lashing out with its claws. The golden dragon king true body held the upper hand both in terms of strength and in bloodline, so the five-elemental Qilin was instantly sent flying. The entire stadium had erupted into a frenzy. Even the most average person in the spectator stands had sensed something just now. What had just happened? Was it a hallucination? They had clearly witnessed the golden dragon king being struck by the five-elemental true flames. So how was it that not only had Tang Wulian evaded the five-elemental true flames, he had gained the upper hand as well? On the rostrum and in the booths, at least 10 people rose to their feet in unison. They could barely believe their own eyes. Even the steadfast smiling Douluo was unable to control his own emotions, and cheered. Nice. NC was looking on in a slightly slack-jawed manner, while Daitianling's expression was a mixture of relief and incredulity. What had just happened? Time reversal. NC murmured to himself in a stunned manner. In the air above, the luster radiating from the giant golden dragon's body clearly dimmed for an instant as it swatted the five-elemental Qilin away, but the golden radiance then quickly returned. That's right. In that dire situation, Tang Wulian had used his spiritual domain. With his time reversal, he was able to alter the time within a small scope, thereby allowing him to react in the instant right before he was struck by the five-elemental true flames. Having evaded the five-elemental true flames, the subsequent attack unleashed by Tongu naturally didn't pose anywhere near as much of a threat. This was the truly incredible part about the time reversal domain, and it was why the smiling Douluo had been stunned when he discovered that Tang Wulian possessed such a domain. At this moment, not only was Tongu stunned by Tang Wulian's abilities, Tang Wulian himself was just as astonished. The five-elemental revolution domain that Tongu had unleashed was a complementary domain that could nullify virtually all control system cell skills. On top of that, it could drastically enhance his powers and affinity with five-elemental power. Most importantly of all, it was a spiritual domain. This meant that Tongu had reached the spirit domain realm and had attained a spiritual domain. As such, his spiritual power wasn't inferior to Tang Wulian's, and he had most likely attained a spiritual domain prior to Tang Wulian, so his spiritual power likely outstripped that of Tang Wulian. Furthermore, that eighth soul skill of his was truly incredibly powerful. Even with Tang Wulian's martial soul true body, golden dragon king bloodline, and body sex congenital secret method, he was still struck by an overwhelming lethal threat. Who could possibly withstand such an attack? After Tongu was sent flying by Tang Wulian, 5 deep gashes had been inflicted onto his body, and 5 colored scales rained down from above. However, he was too stunned to pay any heed to those injuries. What had just happened? He had just gained an absolute upper hand and was about to deal the decisive blow. How had things turned out like this instead? He had also been struck by a sense of disorientation just now, but due to his own immense spiritual power, he was able to return to his senses faster than everyone else. Was that a spiritual domain? How could someone have attained a spiritual domain at such a young age? This was the first time that the two had paused since the commencement of the match, and both of them had been stunned by one another's powers. In the face of such a formidable foe, both of them had only respect and weariness in their hearts for each other. Tang Wulian swiveled around, and golden light rose up from his body, forming a cloud of faint golden mist around him. It was none other than his dragon's repulse. At the same time, his bloodline aura became even more powerful, and he released his dragon's might to its full extent. Even so, he was still appraising Tongu in a very cautious manner. He couldn't afford to be struck by those five elemental true flames again no matter what. When those flames had come into contact with his body, he felt as if all of his power had been cleansed away, and it was the first time that he had ever faced such a soul skill. Tongu appraised Tang Wulian intently, and said in a deep voice, "You're very powerful. It's a pity. If I still had time, I would really want to battle you again when you reach the limit Douluo level. That would surely be a wonderful experience." This was the first time that Tongu had spoken during the match. His voice was rather coarse and husky, but it had a special allure that made it very distinct and unforgettable. Tang Wulian replied, "You're even more powerful. I can sense that what you're displaying now isn't your full power. I hope you can show me everything you have." He had already completely cast the outcome of this match out of his mind. In contrast, he was much more interested in facing Tongu at his full power. Tongu didn't say anything in response, but a mixture of emotions had appeared in his eyes, including anticipation, excitement, but also a hint of sorrow. In that instant, Tang Wulian couldn't help but think back to a few moments ago, where he had almost been killed by Tongu's five elemental divine arrow. In the instant that it was about to strike his head, it suddenly veered off its original course, which meant that it would glance over his forehead rather than pierce straight through his brain. It was quite clear that Tongu had held back, and that he wasn't as barbaric as he seemed. The two of them sprang into action again almost at the exact same moment, and Tang Wulian accelerated rapidly as he flapped his golden dragon wings. At the same time, a series of blue-silver emperor vines erupted from beneath him, but as opposed to sweeping toward his opponent's body, they were binding around him instead. With the vast cultivation rank disparity between the two of them and Tongu's formidable five elemental true flames, Tang Wulian knew that he wouldn't be able to face his opponent with his golden dragon king true body alone. As such, he had to change. One blue-silver emperor vine after another pierced into his massive dragon body, and as they did so, he quickly shrank down to only around 10 meters in length, which made him roughly comparable in size to the five elemental Qilin. His golden scales also took on a bluish golden color, and his aura underwent a complete transformation, as if it had suddenly evolved. For the first time, the energy fluctuations emanating from his body were matching those of the Qilin Douluo. The five elemental Qilin faltered slightly upon seeing this. Was this a soul fusion skill? That's right, it was a blood soul fusion skill, a perfect integration between Tang Wulian's bloodline and martial soul. He had named this form Dragon Emperor True Body, and this was one of the main trump cards leading into the trial of five gods. This was a form that he had only managed to attain after reaching the soul Douluo level, and he had achieved this by completely integrating his blood soul fusion skill into his overall combat prowess, rather than simply fusing a pair of soul skills as one. In his Dragon Emperor True Body form, every single attack he unleashed was going to be a blood soul fusion skill, and if he were to don his suit of battle armor, he would be in his ultimate form. On the rostrum, NC was sitting bolt upright in his chair. Even with his vast wealth of knowledge and experience, he felt as if he were on a roller coaster ride. Just how many secrets and trump cards was Tang Wulian hiding? Many people, including NC, had simply written off Tang Wulian as the Tang sect master. It wasn't that they thought that the Tang sect didn't have anyone else left. They were merely of the opinion that this was an unwise decision. Both the heartless Douluo and amorous Douluo were still around, and it simply made no sense for them to crown such a young man as their sect master, even if he were destined to become a limit Douluo in the future. Assigning him such a heavy burden at such an early stage in his development would easily crush him. Even the smiling Douluo had to correspond with the amorous Douluo on multiple occasions to verify that Tang Wulian was indeed the Tang sect master, let alone everyone else. Chapter 1346. However, during this trial of 5 gods, Tang Wuling had displayed powers that far exceeded everyone's imagination. Even if the heartless Douluo and amorous Douluo were present, they would definitely be just as shocked. Who could have possibly imagined that he would develop to such an extent in such a short time? Perhaps only the heartless Douluo would find it slightly easier to come to terms with this, as he had personally witnessed Tang Wuling receive the blessing of the plane and circumvent that major disaster. After releasing his Dragon Emperor true body, Tang Wuling's aura transformed again. His violent aura had been completely subdued, and his eyes were shimmering with a purplish golden light. In this state, Tang Wuling was experiencing a wonderful feeling, as if all of his abilities had been integrated with one another to perfection. This was the feeling that he had been pursuing during this recent period of cultivation, and now that it had finally arrived, he was ecstatic. He had to latch onto this feeling and grow accustomed to battling in this state. Only then would he be able to further improve and become more powerful. Having reached his current cultivation rank, improvements in soul power were no longer important, as he had built up a sufficiently solid foundation. If he wanted to become more powerful in the future, then he would have to consolidate his powers at his current cultivation rank, just as the amorous Douluo had once told him. Even among limit Douluo, not everyone was equal. There were beings like the Atlas Douluo, who was the undisputed most powerful being in the world, and on the other end of the spectrum were weaker limit Douluo. Even the amorous Douluo himself wasn't considered to be all that powerful among limit Douluo, and he had even admitted that he was no match for the heartless Douluo and the spirit pagoda chairman. What kind of limit Douluo was Tang Wuling going to be in the future? This was a question that the amorous Douluo had once posed to him. If Tang Wuling only wanted to be an ordinary limit Douluo, the amorous Douluo was absolutely confident that he would be able to reach that level in 5 years at most. All he had to do was to attain a spiritual domain during that time, and everything else would automatically fall into place. This was because he had already completely tapped into his latent potential, and his soul power would only continue to improve at a faster and faster rate, as opposed to what was the case with normal titled Douluos. However, if he were to settle for that, then he would never be able to stand at the pinnacle of this entire world. The other path he could take was a slow and steady one way he ensured that every step he took contributed to a more solid foundation. Throughout this process, he had to completely understand himself and experience this world to its full extent. As the one who had been blessed by the ruler of the plane, this was the path that Tang Wuling should take. After the amorous Douluo had given Tang Wuling this lecture, the heartless Douluo had also supported this notion. He had set a target for Tang Wuling, which was to reach a level of power where he would be able to represent the entire Douluo continent to face the holy lord of the abyssal plane. This was the responsibility delegated to him by the ruler of the plane. Only by achieving this could he live up to his full potential. It was exactly because of this that the heartless Douluo and amorous Douluo had decided to instate him as the Tang sect master, even though he was only in his early 20s. By doing this, they would be able to support Tang Wuling with all of the resources of the entire Tang sect in order to help him reach that level as soon as possible. There was no doubting Tang Wuling's foundation. What he required the most now was experience and growth, and that was why they had chosen to send Tang Wuling on this trip as the Tang sect representative. Otherwise, everything would have progressed a lot more smoothly had they sent the amorous Douluo instead. A limit Douluo would be treated with respect everywhere they went, and he wouldn't have to deal with the pressures that Tang Wuling had to face. This was also why Tang Wuling had decided to participate in the trial of 5 gods. He needed more pressure to facilitate his own growth. As it turned out, the 2 limit Douluos had made a very wise decision. During this trip, Tang Wuling had evolved over and over again, and it almost seemed as if he were being reborn anew every single day. The killing Douluo was undoubtedly going to be an important stepping stone in this journey. Hence, Tang Wuling wanted to face the killing Douluo at his full power, just as he was looking forward to facing MC in the battle armor master battle that would conclude the trial of 5 gods. Tongu could sense the powerful battle intent radiating from Tang Wuling's body, and this was a very familiar sensation to him. Back in his youth, he had also experienced a similar process of constant growth. Compared with him, this young man had greater aptitude, as well as many other things that he didn't possess. In that instant, a hint of envy had even welled up in his heart, but that irrational pang of emotion quickly vanished. He had taken the wrong route, so it was only natural that their paths had diverged. Otherwise, perhaps he would also be an adored hero of the empire. Not every powerful soul master enjoyed a smooth journey and developed to fulfill their full potential. There were ones like him, who made irreversible mistakes and permanently lost the ability to turn back. However, this opportunity was not something that he could relinquish no matter what. A thunderous roar rang out from the 5 elemental Keelin's mouth, and scintillating light erupted from the 5 elemental revolution domain. A 5-colored light barrier instantly appeared around Tongu's body. This was an indication that the 5 elemental power around him had reached an extreme level of density. Within this 5-colored light barrier, his aura swelled at an insane rate. In response, Tang Wuling raised his head and let loose a resounding dragon's roar. There was no point in focusing on technique or fine details now. All he could do was put everything he had into this attack. He flapped his wings and unleashed his blue emperor golden dragon takes flight, propelling himself toward his opponent like a moth to a flame. Tongu also shot forth through the air at an incredible speed while blasting a plume of 5 elemental true flames out of his mouth toward Tang Wuling. Having shrunk down to only around 10 meters in length, the dragon emperor true body was clearly far more agile than before, and it twisted around to evade the 5 elemental true flames before also blasting forth a burst of flames. The flames were of a dazzling golden color and were imbued with a peerlessly powerful bloodline aura. There was no temperature to the flames, but they were still extremely formidable. The 5 elemental Keeling shifted horizontally in a maneuver that defied the laws of physics to evade Tang Wuling's dragon emperor true flames, and the two clashed in midair, just as Tang Wuling didn't dare to be struck by the 5 elemental true flames. The 5 elemental Keeling was also very careful not to come into contact with the dragon emperor true flames. The dragon emperor true flames were imbued with the enormous bloodline aura of the golden dragon king, and being struck by it would result in complete bloodline suppression. At the same time, the dragon emperor true flames also contained a virtually deranged destructive aura, and even Tang Wuling himself didn't know what would be the consequence of being affected by that aura. The destructive aura within the dragon emperor true flames stemmed from the essential power of the golden dragon king, and it was also the best way that Tang Wuling had found to release the golden dragon king's innate destructive aura. Thus, the two clashed over and over again, creating a spectacular light show in the process. Neither of them were using any more powerful soul skills, as there was no margin for error at this point in the battle. This match was dragging on far longer than the previous 2 matches in the trial of 5 gods, and it was also by far the most spectacular battle. Chapter 1347. The match soon reached the half-hour mark, and much to everyone's surprise, Tang Wuling was able to hold his own after unleashing his dragon emperor true body. This was a hyper Douluo level clash, and both sides were displaying powers beyond those of the average hyper Douluo. Tang Wuling's attacks became more and more ferocious as he fought, and his abilities were constantly being integrated with one another, putting the 5 elemental Keeling under immense pressure. This type of battle was a process of constant evolution for Tang Wuling, and it was truly an exhilarating experience. The aura of the 5 elemental Keeling was also becoming more and more powerful, and with the enhancements he received from his 5 elemental revolution domain, he was able to maintain a slight upper hand over Tang Wuling. If any of his 5 elemental true flames were to come into contact with Tang Wuling, then Tang Wuling would be forced to use his time reversal domain to take evasive measures. Conversely, having learned his lesson from before, Tongu was also able to react to Tang Wuling's time reversal domain appropriately. As a complementary spiritual domain, the 5 elemental revolution domain was relatively less taxing on Tongu's spiritual power, whereas Tang Wuling's time reversal domain had the ability to warp time, thereby requiring enormous spiritual power expenditure. As such, he couldn't simply use it as he pleased, so even with this trump card, he was unable to gain the upper hand. Soon, a series of wounds began to appear on both of their bodies. It was at this point that the disparity between their bloodlines began to show. Tang Wuling's self-regenerative ability was clearly superior to that of Tongu. The 5 elemental Keeling's wounds were also healing on their own, but at a much slower rate than that of the dragon emperor true body. Why was Tongu in such lackluster form? Was he trying to hide something? NC's brows furrowed tightly as he appraised the battle from the rostrum. Only he was aware of just how powerful Tongu truly was, and he had very lofty expectations for him. Tongu had proposed to participate in this match, hoping to display his powers to the entire Douluo empire, and also to explain some things. He wanted to tell his side of the story so he could be accepted by the public again. However, the powers that Tongu was currently displaying were far different from what NC had expected. In his mind, this battle should have concluded long ago. There was no way that Tang Wuling should have been able to last this long. Indeed, Tang Wuling's powers were far beyond those of the average soul Douluo, but still should have been completely insignificant in the face of Tongu's powers. After all, they were on completely different levels. Just what was Tongu trying to do? Why was he still hiding his true power at a time like this? If he wanted to give the spectators a surprise, he should have done so already. Instead, it appeared that Tang Wuling was gradually turning the tables on him. All of the spectators were completely entranced by this battle. They were witnessing a soul master battle of the highest caliber. Who could have imagined that such a battle would be open to the public? This really was well worth the ticket prices they had paid. Boom. Dazzling light erupted from the five elemental Keelin's body to send the Dragon Emperor flying, but at the same time, the Dragon Emperor had inflicted a deep claw gash onto its back. The five elemental Keelin swiveled around before exhaling a burst of five elemental true flames out of its mouth, which surged toward the Dragon Emperor true body in a ring formation. At the same time, his ninth soul ring finally lit up for the first time. In the instant that it did so, the air suddenly congealed. A spherical barrier of light appeared in the sky, encompassing the five elemental Keelin and Dragon Emperor, both of which were frozen in midair. Even with the Dragon Emperor's immense powers, it was unable to move in the slightest. Tang Wuolin felt the power within his body rapidly seep away, just like how it had felt when he had been struck by the five elemental true flames. What was even more terrifying was that within this light barrier, time and space seemed to have also congealed, so even his time reversal domain was rendered largely ineffective. Tang Wuolin knew that this wasn't because his time reversal domain wasn't powerful enough. Instead, his opponent's spiritual power had always been superior to his, and he was finally pressing this advantage. His eighth soul ring lit up, and the five elemental divine arrow that had posed such a major threat to Tang Wuolin's life before emerged once again. It was clear that this was going to be the decisive exchange. Tang Wuolin didn't panic at all. In fact, he had been waiting for this moment. Tongu's powerful ninth soul skill would undoubtedly be able to decide the battle, but this also meant that he had been forced to unleash his most powerful attack by Tang Wuolin. Thus, this was also an opportunity for Tang Wuolin. Six golden soul rings appeared around his Dragon Emperor true body, and the sixth one abruptly lit up. In that instant, the Dragon Emperor true body's golden eye suddenly turned into a crimson color. This was his most powerful golden dragon king ability, one that he hadn't even used in that sparring match against 2GA, yet he was displaying it again now. This ninth soul skill of Tongu's was known as the Great Five Elemental Divine Light Barrier. Due to how fearsome the offensive power of his eighth soul skill was, it would be pointless for him to have another powerful offensive soul skill for his ninth one. Hence, he decided to obtain a soul skill that could complement his eighth soul skill, thereby giving rise to the Great Five Elemental Divine Light Barrier. The most fearsome aspect about this soul skill was that it could be released instantaneously, and it was like an enlarged version of his five elemental true flames. Once someone became encompassed within the barrier, they would be severely restricted unless their spiritual power or soul power were to outstrip that of Tongu. Otherwise, they would have no choice but to take Tongu's attack head-on in their severely debilitated state. However, right at this moment, Tang Wuolin suddenly began to undergo a transformation. In the instant that his golden eyes had turned crimson, a layer of crimson light also appeared over his massive dragon body. The expressions on the faces of Shrek's six monsters changed drastically upon seeing this. They were petrified that Tang Wuolin would go on the same rampage as he had in the Dou Spirit Empire. He was currently representing the entire Tang sect. If he were to lose control on such a grand occasion, then the resulting negative impact would definitely be immeasurable. At this moment, they could only place their trust in Tang Wuolin and pray that he would be able to control himself while displaying his most powerful form. The battle had finally reached its climax, and the fearsome roars of countless dragons suddenly rang out from within the Great Five Elemental Divine Light Barrier. Tang Wuolin's Dragon Emperor true body abruptly swelled in size, and a strange rune appeared on each and every one of his scales. In that instant, the light in the entire sports stadium suddenly dimmed, and a layer of crimson light appeared outside the Great Five Elemental Divine Light Barrier. The crimson light struck the beholder with a terrifying sense of asphyxiation, as if heaven and earth were about to be destroyed. The five elemental divine arrow had already shot forth from the five elemental Keelin's head, yet right at this moment, a burst of crimson light suddenly erupted from the Dragon Emperor's body. As soon as the five elemental divine arrow traveled into the crimson light, it decelerated sharply, and its power was also being constantly weakened during the process. Within the Great Five Elemental Divine Light Barrier, a voice that only Tongu could hear rang out deep within his heart. Golden Dragon Infernal Massacre. All of a sudden, a peculiar scene surfaced in Tongu's mind. Even though his spiritual power was superior to that of Tang Wuolin, he felt as if he had been transported into another world. This was a completely crimson world, within which countless living beings were wailing in despair. In the sky above, there was what appeared to be a boundless golden dragon that was roaring to the heavens, and its terrifying aura was crucifying one living being after another. What kind of soul skill was this? It was clear that this wasn't just some simple energy-based soul skill. It was also imbued with a powerful spiritual attack. This was not good. The five elemental true flames around Tongu swelled drastically as he let loose an enraged roar, fighting to preserve his Great Five Elemental Divine Light Barrier against the fearsome power that was converging from outside. In that instant, the two powers reached a brief state of equilibrium. The five elemental divine arrow pierced through the Dragon Emperor's shoulder, but under the influence of the Golden Dragon Infernal Massacre, it had missed Tang Wuolin's vitals. Meanwhile, his Crimson Dragon Emperor claws had also reached the five elemental Keelin, and the only thing stopping them from actually striking Tongu was the power of the Great Five Elemental Divine Light Barrier. However, even though the power of the Golden Dragon Infernal Massacre had been restricted, it was continuing to build and only becoming more and more ferocious. As a result, Tang Wuolin's Dragon Emperor claws were slowly inching toward Tongu's chest. Chapter 1348. The light from the Great Five Elemental Divine Light Barrier and the Golden Dragon Infernal Massacre began to wane almost at the exact same moment, indicating that the energy being released by both sides was beginning to subside. Everyone had their limit, even limit Douluo. The five elemental divine arrow had pierced through the Dragon Emperor's shoulder, but having been weakened by the Golden Dragon Infernal Massacre, it hadn't managed to deal much damage to Tang Wuolin. With Tang Wuolin's self-regenerative ability, this match was far from over. Were they still evenly matched? At this point, Tang Wuolin was already in a position where he couldn't lose, and the smiling Douluo heaved an internal sigh of relief upon seeing this. At the same time, he was filled with admiration toward this young sect master. Never did he think that Tang Wuolin would still have such a powerful trump card hidden up his sleeve at this point in the battle. It was truly an incredible sight, just as everyone thought that both sides would run out of power, thereby leading to the battle reaching its endgame. An alarming turn of events suddenly unfolded. Tongu raised his head, and in that instant, Tang Wuolin suddenly discovered that the bright and piercing light in his eyes had suddenly dimmed. On top of that, they were filled with emotions of contentment and relief. Before Tang Wuolin had a chance to process this, the Great Five Elemental Divine Light Barrier around him suddenly crumbled away into the specks of five-colored light without any warning. Thus, all impediment was abruptly lifted from Tang Wuolin's Dragon Emperor claws, and the power of his Golden Dragon Infernal Massacre instantly erupted forth in a frenzy. The Dragon Emperor claws pierced through the five elemental Keelin's chest in an instant, while also injecting the fearsome destructive power of the Golden Dragon Infernal Massacre into its body. The shimmering five-colored light around Tongu's body was immediately tinged with a hint of crimson. This was not good. Tang Wuolin was very alarmed by this sudden turn of events, and he instantly unleashed his time reversal domain. However, in that instant, the five elemental Keelin suddenly raised its head and looked him square in the eyes. In the face of Tongu's gaze, Tang Wuolin was suddenly struck by an abrupt spiritual blow. At this point in the battle, he had actually already reached his limit as well, and both his spiritual power and soul power had been exhausted to the extreme. As such, the spiritual interference rendered him unable to completely manifest his time reversal domain. At Tang Wuolin's current level of power, he could only reverse time for an instant using his spiritual domain. Reversing time any further would require far too much spiritual power expenditure. Boom. Both of the enormous combatants plummeted to the ground almost at the exact same time, and cries of surprise rang out across the entire venue. Even the Douluo Empire citizens who bore the utmost contempt toward Tongu couldn't help but rise to their feet. The battle they had just witnessed had been truly spectacular. The powers displayed by Tongu had stunned everyone present, yet much to everyone's astonishment, his power had suddenly crumbled away just as everyone had thought that this would be an evenly matched contest. Tang Wuolin's mind was currently completely blank. Why had Tongu prevented himself from being saved? With these past few days of cultivation, the effect of the Ice God Bead, and the holy light baptism he had received from the Holy Spirit Douluo prior to the match, he was able to completely control his emotions even after unleashing his Golden Dragon Infernal Massacre. Initially, he had regarded Tongu with nothing but enmity, yet as the battle had progressed, he had begun to see Tongu more and more as a rival who was worthy of respect. In particular, he couldn't forget how Tongu had spared him when he had a chance to kill him. This intimidating man definitely had an appearance that belied his internal self. Tang Wuolin didn't want to strike down such a respectable figure during this trial of five gods. However, everything had unfolded so quickly, and his mind was filled with questions. The two massive bodies crashed heavily down onto the ground, upon which they reverted back to their human forms. Tang Wuolin had caught Tongu in his arms so that he wouldn't fall onto the ground. At this moment, there was a clearly visible fist-sized hole on Tongu's chest. What was even more fearsome was that not a single drop of blood was flowing out of such a large wound. The edge of the wound was completely crimson in color, and this crimson color was permeating toward his entire body. This was a terrifying destructive power that struck one with a sense of asphyxiation. Due to how close Tang Wuolin was situated to Tongu, he could sense just how rapidly Tongu's life force was fading. In spite of this, Tongu wore a relieved smile. Thank you. Tongu laid a hand onto Tang Wulin's shoulder and stood up as if he were completely fine. Even with a gaping wound on his chest, he was standing with his back completely straight and his head held high and proud. NC immediately flew down from the rostrum and rushed onto the competition platform, but Tongu held up a hand to keep NC from approaching him. Don't come near me. I have something to say. At this moment, the entire sports stadium was completely silent, and all eyes were on him. As a limit Douluo, NC was naturally also able to sense that Tongu's life force was rapidly fading, and this was something that he had never thought would happen. How had things become like this? Why? Why are you doing this? NC couldn't help but yell in an enraged manner. Tongu cast his gaze toward NC with a gentle look in his eyes before extending a deep bow. I'm sorry, teacher, but I must disappoint you here. Teacher? Aside from Lon Yue, everyone on the rostrum was stunned to hear this. No one was aware that the notorious Douluo was NC's disciple. That's right, not only was he NC's disciple, he was NC's first disciple. Rest assured, teacher, I won't bring shame to your name. I've waited for this day for far too long. You can forgive me for some things, but I can never forgive myself. All these years, I've been waiting for this opportunity. There are some things that I must do, and some things that I must say. Before my life comes to an end, please allow me to say what I have to say. In that instant, Tongu's aura began to transform, and Tang Wulin was struck by a repulsive force that quickly carried him to over 100 meters away. What a powerful aura. This aura was on a completely different level compared to what Tongu had displayed during the match. Tang Wulin had only sensed an aura of this caliber from very few people. These people were the Atlas Douluo, the Heartless Douluo, the Amorous Douluo, the Light Dark Douluo, the Mirror Douluo, and the Boundless Ocean Douluo. All of them were limit Douluos. Did that mean that this Douluo was actually a limit Douluo as well? Just as Tang Wulin was repelled away, a series of images began to appear around Tongu. These images were extremely clear and were displaying one story after another. This was a mental manifestation, the signature ability of all limit Douluo. The general public wasn't aware of what mental manifestation entailed, but all of the high-grade soul masters present certainly were. He really was a limit Douluo. Chapter 1349. Everyone was struck by a sense of shock, followed by befuddlement. Even if the Douluo had committed an extremely heinous crime, he was still a limit Douluo. As long as he was willing to serve the Empire, all would be forgiven. However, not only did he not turn to the Empire for amnesty, he lost this match in the trial of 5 gods and seemed to be about to lose his life as well. This had indeed been an extremely spectacular battle, but those in attendance who were at the title Douluo level or above could all see that Tang Wulin was still quite a way off from reaching the top. If Tongu really were a limit Douluo and had battled with his powers as a limit Douluo, there was no way that Tang Wulin would have been a match for him. However, he had only chosen to display his powers as a limit Douluo now that he was on the brink of death. Why had he done this? Everyone was completely perplexed. No one knew what could have happened to him to have led to the decision to throw away this match, as well as his own life. At this point, Tongu was already in a very bad condition. His entire face had turned crimson, and all of the scales on his body were tinged with a destructive aura. However, he paid no heed to this at all, and the images arising from his mental manifestation began to change. One of the images suddenly expanded and was made visible to everyone in the sports stadium, as well as all of the Douluo Empire citizens sitting in front of their Soul television screens. The image depicted a little boy and a little girl. The little girl only appeared to be around 7 or 8 years of age, but she was already quite a beauty. She wore a pink floral dress and was dancing over a lush meadow. The little boy stood beside her and watched her in silence. Even though he was also very young, there was a gentle look in his eyes that belied his age. Upon closer inspection, one would discover that there were some faint similarities between the contours of the little boy and Tongu's faces. The dancing little girl stopped before waving a hand toward the little boy, upon which the latter immediately rushed over and handed her a towel, then also pulled out some food and water for her out of his backpack. Tongu's deep voice rang out to narrate the unfolding scenes. A very long time ago, a little boy fell in love with a little girl. Both of them were from ordinary families, and the little girl had always been very beautiful and elegant. Perhaps it was predetermined by fate, but the little boy fell in love with her at first sight. Everyone knew that he was telling his own story. If a normal person were telling their own life story, there most likely wouldn't be many people who were willing to listen. However, this was a story being told by a limit Douluo who was on the brink of death on the grand stage of the trial of 5 gods. Under these circumstances, over 40% of the entire Douluo Empire was listening to his story, regardless of whether someone detested him or knew nothing about him. They were all listening to his story. The little girl was adored by everyone around her, and to his credit, the little boy was quite brave. He expressed his feelings to her very early on, and he told her that he would love and cherish her for the rest of his life. At the time, the little girl had proudly told him that when she grew up, she was going to marry a hero, the most powerful one in the entire world. Hence, the little boy set that as his target and promised her that he would do his best. Such a story was very commonplace, and perhaps everyone had experienced similar childhoods. However, it was a completely different feeling to be hearing it from a limit Douluo. From that day forth, the little boy became completely devoted to the little girl. If she wanted something, he would do everything in his power to get it for her, even if it meant that he had to steal and lie. In order to be able to pick her up for school every day, he would wake up over an hour earlier than he otherwise have to and run to her house. Their parents were aware of this, but they didn't think much of it, thinking that this was nothing more than a fleeting crush for a pair of children who didn't know any better. However, no one knew just how much he loved her. In his eyes, she was his goddess. At the time, the girl was 8, and the boy was 9. The image gradually transitioned, revealing the little boy seated on his bed with a determined look on his face. After awakening his martial soul, the little boy constantly worked extremely hard in his cultivation. However, he was quickly made aware of the fact that his martial soul was a dog-type martial soul, and that he only possessed rank 2 innate soul power. There was no future for him. However, he was very resilient because he was constantly striving toward his goal of becoming the most powerful hero in the world. Once he reached those dizzying heights, he would be able to marry the girl of his dreams. The image transformed again, and both the little boy and the little girl had grown up a little. The little boy seemed to be a little introverted, while the little girl had become even more beautiful. She was surrounded by many other kids of her age, while the little boy stood further away and watched over her in silence. Wherever she went, the little girl was always the center of attention, and the little boy was content with just being able to see her every day. The little girl continued to order him around like a servant, and there were many other kids who referred to him as her dog, but he didn't care. He was happy as long as she was happy. When she was in a good mood, she would call him up to play with her, and when she was in a foul mood, she would beat him and verbally abuse him to vent her emotions. However, the little boy never got mad at her. At the time, the little boy's family wasn't very wealthy. He would always buy the cheapest food for himself to eat and save up the rest of his money to buy the little girl the things that she wanted. In the image, the little boy was quite thin with a rather unhealthy palate to his skin, and he was even slightly shorter than the little girl. One was like a vibrant jewel, while the other was like a lusterless discarded jewelry box. The image transitioned to the gates of an academy. The little girl rushed into the academy in an excited manner, followed by the little boy, who was wearing clothes that were slightly worn and tattered. Through his unrelenting efforts, the little boy finally made it into the academy that the little girl wanted to attend. However, he was only accepted as a working student, so he was only permitted to attend the academy by completing a large array of manual labor jobs every day. Even so, he felt like he was one step closer to his goal. Time slowly passed by, and soon, both the little boy and the little girl had reached puberty. The little girl was more beautiful than ever, while the little boy was still just as mundane, and to his shock and horror, he discovered that many pursuers had begun to appear around the little girl. In the image, both of them had reached around 15 to 16 years of age. The little girl was surrounded by a group of tall and handsome boys, while the little boy was standing not far away, carrying her bag with his fists tightly clenched. Tongu stood with a faint smile on his face as he spoke, seemingly having completely immersed himself into his memories. Virtually the entire Douluo Empire was listening to his story, and even Dai Tianling made no effort to stop him. This was the wish of a limit Douluo, and it was perhaps even his final wish. He had to be allowed to finish his story no matter what. In order to prove his power, the little boy challenged the little pursuers in private. He didn't care how many injuries he sustained from those fights, and during that time, he earned himself the nickname of Mad Dog. However, his heart was broken when the little girl suddenly told him one day that she hated him because he had made her lose all of her friends, that no one wanted to play with her because of him. The little boy told her that all he wanted to do was to protect her. He begged her not to cut him out of her life, and from that day forth, the little boy became even more withdrawn. He worked harder and harder in his cultivation, but his aptitude was still too lackluster in the end. As the two grew up, the little girl's powers far outstripped his, and he was gradually being left behind by his peers. Chapter 1350. However, he still didn't give up. He cultivated with everything that he had, and he believed that as long as he continued to work toward his dream, his efforts would come into fruition someday. That was all until that day. His voice suddenly trailed off here, and in that instant, even his body was beginning to tremble slightly. In the image, the beautiful little girl had grown up to be around 18 to 19 years of age, and she was holding hands with a tall and handsome boy, while an elderly woman was standing before them. They were having a conversation, and the little boy, who had also grown up to be a young adult at this point, was watching them from a hidden corner. The little boy's mother had always been aware of just how much her son loved the little girl. She had tried to tell him that they were a good match, but he refused to listen. On that day, the little boy's mother was suddenly unable to find him, and she bumped into the little girl while searching for her son. She told the little girl that if she didn't return the little boy's feelings, then she should give him a clear rejection, but to do so in a way that wouldn't hurt him. As a mother, her greatest wish was for her son to grow up to be happy and healthy. Perhaps the little girl was trying to show the boy that she had nothing to do with the little boy. She told the little boy's mother that she had always seen him as nothing more than a dog, and that he was constantly sticking to her like an annoying bandage. She wanted nothing more than for the little boy to leave her alone, and after saying all those hurtful things, she departed with her boyfriend in an arrogant manner, leaving the little boy's mother behind to weep on her own. The image transitioned alongside his story, and everyone's emotions were also being swayed. This sounded more like the pure yet tragic story of an ordinary little boy, rather than the story of a limit Douluo. The little boy ran away like a madman. Later that day, it began to rain so heavily that it was almost impossible to see the path ahead. However, the little boy continued to run, and even he didn't know where he was. Never did he think that the little girl had seen him as nothing more than a dog, and his heart was completely broken. His young impulsive heart was filled with negative emotions, and he felt like he was a failure, a disgrace to his own family. He no longer wished to live, and he bought some insecticide to put an end to his own life. Tears were already streaming down Tongu's face at this point. Even though so many years had passed, the recollection of these memories still brought him immense pain. Tang Wolin was appraising Tongu from not far away while listening to his story, and he felt like he could empathize with Tongu's suffering. His relationship history wasn't as tragic as that of Tongu, but back then, he had also awakened a trash martial soul, and even the soul spirit he had obtained was a defective one. As such, he was more than aware of how much effort someone with lackluster aptitude had to give in order to become powerful, and it seemed that Tongu had sacrificed even more than he had. The little boy didn't die, but he became a monster. Scales grew all over his body, and he wasn't very good looking to begin with, so he was even more detested by everyone who saw him. Even members of his own family had fainted from fear after seeing what he had become. From that day forth, his mental state began to change. He came to hate the entire world, and on that day, he met the little girl one last time. The image transitioned to depict the little girl, who was staring at the little boy in shock and horror, clearly having been frightened by his new monstrous appearance. The little boy asked her if she had ever loved, even just a little bit. The little girl was a little fearful of him, but she then quickly remembered that she was more powerful than him and didn't have anything to fear. Hence, she proudly told him that she had never loved him, and that the sight of him disgusted her, so she never wanted to see him again. In that instant, the little boy truly died on the inside. He bade her farewell, and also said goodbye to his youth. However, he had always had a sense of conviction in his heart. He was going to return to her someday as the most powerful being in the world, and show her that she had made the wrong choice. It was there that the little boy decided to pursue further soulmaster education. He didn't tell his family. He merely departed on his own without telling anyone. He was determined not to return until he had made a name for himself. It was also at that time that he discovered that his own martial soul had mutated. Finally, he arrived at the academy of his dreams. In order to make it to Monster Academy, he had put in countless effort, and it was then that his fortune began to turn. Following its mutation, his martial soul improved at an extraordinary rate. Things that had been virtually impossible for his past self were things that he could now accomplish with ease, and he was ecstatic. He believed that the little girl would definitely regret her decision when he returned to her after attaining sufficient power. Hence, even though his aptitude had become exceptional, he still worked extremely hard. He learned from everyone around him and constantly refined himself in his quest for greater power. His cultivation rank rose at a rapid rate, and in 10 years, he had reached close to the title Douluo level from his starting point as Soul Grandmaster. After that, he chose to go into seclusion, and he had already made the decision to go back and find the little girl once he completed his seclusion. He was going to stand before her and tell her that she had been wrong about him, and that he was going to stand at the pinnacle of this entire world someday. At the time, the little boy no longer harbored any expectations for her. He simply wanted to recover his pride. Perhaps he was blessed by the heavens, but on that occasion, he managed to go into a state of deep meditation. This was an extended period of deep meditation, and it was like a long slumber. When he awakened, he discovered that not only had he become a titled Douluo, he also established an extremely solid foundation. When he obtained his ninth soul skill, everything that he had accumulated erupted forth at once, and he became a hyper Douluo. At that point, he had become the most powerful being among the younger generation of Monster Academy. Tongu's eyes were filled with pride. This was pride that he had in himself, and he had obtained it through his relentless conscientious efforts. He bade farewell to his teacher and returned to his home with excitement in his heart. He was going to find that little girl and to visit his own family. Even though he was still very hideous, he was already a teacher at Monster Academy, and he had a very lofty social status, as well as a level of income that would ensure he would never have to worry about money. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.